Good afternoon to everyone who's joined us. And as Kate says, I'm Jeff. I'm the marketing director at Flagship, and I'm here to cover a few points before about what we're seeing in the market before turning it over to Ed, who, as Kate noted, leads our cybersecurity efforts. So Ed's going to cover an approach to protecting clients and walk through some really good real-life examples that I think you'll find enlightening. I do want to thank Kate and everyone from the Bridgeport Regional Business Council for giving us this opportunity to present this program. And again, thank you all for joining. I think you'll find it very informative. So in case you're not familiar with Flagship, we're a technology and managed service provider located nearby in Shelton. We serve clients headquartered throughout Southern New England and the New York metro area. Been around for about 20 years, working with commercial businesses, municipalities, schools, healthcare practices. We've provided the full gamut of IT services, and we definitely try to put our focus on how IT solves your business challenges, whether it's security, cloud, business continuity. The idea is to make sure that IT and technology is serving you and making your operations efficient, profitable, and protected, which is what we're going to be talking about today. So being protected was one of the big challenges of 2020. With the COVID pandemic, cybersecurity attacks rose considerably. As many employees were working from home, organizations may have not set up the right infrastructure in place to make sure everyone was going to be secure. So you can see that ransomware payouts tripled according to the Sophos annual threat reports. And we saw that attacks particularly increased with schools, municipalities, small businesses that may not have had the necessary protections in place. There also were places that had valuable personal information or company information that hackers could leverage and resell. And as noted by Proofpoint, attacks require someone in your operation to fall prey to some intrusion. So all that has to happen, as Ed will walk through some of the examples, is for an employee to click on a link in an email, visit the wrong website, download an app, or run a cloud application that's been compromised to initiate a cyber attack. And as with phishing scams, an email may look like it's from a reputable source, but it's meant to induce you to reveal some personal information, a login, or click on something that will start the attack. And one of the threats that we found that's really hard to plan for is, either internal, disgruntled employees who may want to steal information or do something, or just even careless individuals who leave important data out on their desk that somebody else can copy and steal. And we often see these types of external vulnerabilities when we're on site doing security assessments. So the implications of these threats fall typically into one or more of these three buckets. So you're the loss of personal information or company data, financial loss, the disruption of your business, or the damage of your reputation. And the press frequently reports when there's an attack on a large business like Yahoo, Marriott, Equifax, but attacks happen all the time that don't make the national news, and although they may make the local news, and you certainly do not want your organization associated with those types of news breaks. They often say that all publicity is good publicity as long as they spell your name right, but that is not the case with cybercrime. So, if you could step right back then. So Ed's going to walk through our layered approach to building a roadmap to secure and protect your business. And every client situation is unique. So, may start with some fundamentals like the firewalls and the antivirus tools, but then it really entails finding the optimum level of protections for your operation and also for your budget. So we do a number of security assessments to help tailor a plan for our clients, from simple dark web scans and phishing tests to more full security audits or network vulnerability analysis. So we're happy to answer some questions and talk about that at the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ed, so you could run through the security operations program and several case studies.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. Again, my name is Ed Surignano. Joined Flagship back in 2008, and I've spent the last 5 to 6 years mainly focused on security. So what I'd like to do first is do an overview of our SecOps team and our SecOps framework. So we created what we call the Flagship SecOps team. The primary goal of this team is to close the gap typically seen between IT security and IT operations. By integrating technology and processes, we can improve business agility while at the same time reducing risk. So over the last 4 years, we developed the SecOps framework, which is built off of the National Institute of Standards and Technologies Cybersecurity Framework, also known as NIST CSF. So this framework was originally designed for critical infrastructure, but being very versatile, it can be used in organizations of all sizes. The framework is outcome driven, meaning it doesn't define how the outcome must be achieved. And this allows both large and small cybersecurity budgets to achieve their end goals in a way that's feasible for them. So as you can see here, there are 5 core functions that make up the framework core: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. These functions are organized concurrently with one another to represent a security life cycle. So each function is essential for a good security posture, as well as a successful management of cybersecurity risk. And if you notice on the last core function in green, recover, it links back to the initial identify. And this shows that this is a life cycle or a process, and it never ends. This is very important, that a security process, should constantly develop, self-evaluate, and adjust, because attackers are constantly evolving their tactics as well. So what I'd like to do now is dig into the framework a little bit in detail. So as I stated before, the first function is identify. Identify function assists in developing an understanding of how to manage cybersecurity risk. And this risk can be to anything within the company: systems, people, assets, data, even capabilities. Being the foundation of the 5 functions, calls for organizations to develop a better understanding of how to manage risks associated with their systems. And it revolves around pinpointing all the systems and platforms that are included within a company's infrastructure. You can't protect what you don't know about. So let's go through a few example categories and a few examples within this function. So asset inventory and management. Simply put, this would include identifying physical or virtual assets, software, any type of asset within an organization to establish the basis of an asset management program. My example here is very simple: inventory and documentation. Again, knowing what you have, documenting all aspects of the environment, from how something is configured all the way to full network visios, illustrating the flow of data through your network. And second example category is risk management, identifying and documenting any asset vulnerabilities. This can include any business impacts from these threats, along with determining your risk level. This is very important to properly prioritize remediation, and it develops, a strategy for your risk tolerances as well as your remediation goals. And an example here in this category would be vulnerability management. Scanning for vulnerabilities helps you identify your risks and allows for proper planning and remediation. So now let's move on to protect, to develop and implement the appropriate safeguards to ensure the delivery of critical services. The goal within protect is to reduce the impact of a cybersecurity event by utilizing a combination of both best practices and protecting technology. This revolves around limiting and controlling access to the systems, physical, virtual, as well as putting protections in place to prevent unauthorized access. So protecting technology is a good category under this function. Supporting people and processes with technology can ensure there is security resilience of information systems and assets. This can include hardware and software, like I discussed before, on-site or off-site. Simple example here, antivirus. And next sample category would be awareness and training. How effective are your controls if your end users don't know the security basics. Phishing, spoofing, these are still some of the most successful attacks against organizations today. And employees knowing what to look for can save your company data, can save your reputation. My example here, security awareness and training. It's a very cost-effective way to mitigate many forms of risk. So now let's move on to detect. To develop and implement the appropriate activities to identify the occurrence of a security event. So the detect function enables the timely discovery of a cybersecurity event. This function is critical and it's often overlooked. Your business may have antivirus, but is it managed? Is anyone reviewing the alerts to ensure that there are no issues? The faster an event could be detected, the faster it could be dealt with. And this ensures that the effects of the event are minimized. Continuous security monitoring. Systems and assets must be continuously monitored to identify events and verify the effectiveness of protecting measures in place. Good example here would be a security incident and event management, also known as a SIM. Provides real-time analysis and correlation of security events and logs across the network. And this can include servers, applications, even networking hardware, such as switches or firewalls. Another thing to note within this function, an example is the importance of not only having these logs from every system, but keeping them immutable. Many times we'll see attackers will attempt to clear or even alter logs to keep their presence hidden. Let me move on to anomalies and event alerting. Events should be detected promptly, and the impact of the event should be well understood. Good example here would be our managed breach detection offering. Typically when a cyber criminal gains access to a machine, they will set up a foothold on that machine or a way to reconnect if needed. This service detects these footholds and alerts on what it found, and more importantly, how to remediate. And then we're going to move on to the respond function. Respond is to develop and implement the appropriate activities when facing a detected security event. So the respond function supports the ability to contain the impact of an event. And without having this function ready, if needed, delays are created, which creates additional opportunities for actors to expand their reach of the threat, whether it's additional data, ransomware, etc. Good example category here would be mitigation, ensuring information security events detected are dealt with swiftly and efficiently. And again, I'm going to use our managed breach detection here. As I stated earlier, this service not only offers the ability to detect a foothold, but it also assists with the proper remediation steps required to correct the issue. There are many other examples that I could have used, but I purposely want to illustrate here that some security products, policies, etc., can cover multiple functions within the framework. Response planning. In the event of a cybersecurity incident, there should be processes and procedures in place. This includes managing communications during and after the event with stakeholders, law enforcement, external parties, more importantly, internal staff. Do you have an internal incident response plan or policy? If you do, that's great. Have you tested it? If you don't, do you know what steps your staff should take during an incident? This is very important, and you'd much rather have this and not need it than need it and not have it. And the final function is recover. To develop and implement the appropriate activities for resilience and to restore capabilities or services that were impaired due to a security event. So the recovery function supports the timely recovery to normal operations and reduces the impact from a cybersecurity incident. And the purpose here is to ensure that the business can recuperate following an attack, that any impacted systems are able to rebound, and that activity can return to normal. An example category here is backup and disaster recovery. Back up your data, test your restore processes. These are your last lines of defense. And also recovery planning. Having good backups is only part of this equation. Knowing how all systems will be restored and should be restored is critical. This is where a disaster recovery runbook comes into play, also called the DR runbook. This is a detailed document on, how all systems can be recovered, and this ensures that you've tested this process and you're not finding out, when your disk array dies, when your server has ransomware, when a natural disaster destroys your server, that you forgot to say maybe back up a critical server that was overlooked. So this is very important. And just to note here as well, business continuity also plays a large role within this function, it being more of a proactive plan to avoid disruption, whereas disaster recovery is more of a reactive plan. So we then take our framework and we further define it. We define it into 4 additional tracks. So users, endpoints, infrastructure, and network. Each track has the 5 core functions applied. And this does is it assists with finding weaknesses within each function. And as you can see, the 4 tracks are users, endpoints, infrastructure, and network. So what I'd like to do is review a sample protection layer. We'll apply the protection functions to all 4 tracks. How do we protect our users? How do we protect endpoints, infrastructure, network? Let's find out. So a quick review of the protect function. It calls for identity management, access control, awareness and training, and protecting technologies. So let's start off with the users track. Again, that may include identity, access management, authentication, and policies. And here you can see that we're using MFA, multi-factor authentication in our example. For our endpoints, we're going to use antivirus. Very simple. Infrastructure. Again, we can use antivirus. And as I previously talked about, some items can cover multiple functions. Some items can also cover multiple tracks. And for network, let's use a next-gen firewall to help protect at the edge. So now we have a very basic protection layer. Let's begin to add additional products or policies to further increase our posture within this function. So how about we add cybersecurity training and say a password manager to help better protect our users. For our endpoints, let's add disk encryption for our laptops and maybe a mobile device management system for our mobile phones. Let's pretend our infrastructure has a file server, right? Which most of our companies do have a file server. Let's ensure that the file permissions are properly configured. We can also add vulnerability management to ensure any new vulnerabilities are discovered in a timely manner. And finally, for our network, let's add a SIM. And we could also segment the network to minimize lateral movement. So now I'd like to do is review 2 case studies and illustrate how having a security framework in place can help stop an attack. Both of these companies are self-managed. They have their own IT staff, and Flagship was brought in to assist at different stages of the attacks. So the first case study is a manufacturing company out of Connecticut. The initial attack vector was a malicious email sent to a user, very typical. The criminals were able to encrypt their servers, including one of their backup repositories. And we were brought in after most of the events took place and assisted with the recovery efforts. And the second example is a distributor out of New York. Their server was compromised in the recent Microsoft Exchange zero-day vulnerability that I imagine most of you have heard of. The criminals here gained access to the server. They began to laterally move within the network. And in this specific case, we were brought in early during the attack. We worked with their IT staff and we were able to help mitigate the attack and recover any of the affected systems. So let's review the first case study a little bit more in depth here. Again, the attacker starts off by sending a malicious email to a user. This user proceeds to open the email, click the link. This link was to a malicious Word document. This document, launched a reverse shell back to the attacker's system. Now the attacker has control of that user's machine. They then used a combination of custom scripts and even some built-in Windows tools to move laterally through the network. The attacker's goal in this phase was to access as many other systems as they can. And once they were satisfied with their new footprint, they began to exfiltrate data. In this case, this data was and typically will be confidential, financial, whatever you don't want out there is the stuff they're going to grab. And they use this data typically as collateral for the next phase of the attack. Ransomware, data encryption. If things weren't bad enough, they then proceeded to encrypt the compromised systems and demand a payment for the decryption key. So what I like to do now is review how the framework can help stop this attack. So again, starting in the email phase, we can protect our infrastructure by implementing email protection. This could have stopped the malicious email from even making it to the end user's mailbox. In this example here, this was not the case. The message made it to the user. The attack chain continues. So in the next phase, again, we can protect our users by ensuring they have security awareness training. If that user had proper training, maybe they would have known better. Maybe they wouldn't have clicked the link. In this case, the employees were not properly trained. They didn't know any better. They clicked the link. So now this machine was also not known to the IT staff. We typically refer to this as shadow IT. The use of a device without the approval or configuration from the IT department. So if this endpoint was identified by a network asset discovery solution, right, this would have ensured IT knew of the system and knew that the system was on the network. Why is this important in this case? Because the machine was unknown to IT. Again, it was not configured by IT. It wasn't properly protected. It didn't have antivirus, which could have, hopefully detected and stopped the malicious code from executing. And the next phase, they could have detected the attacker's traffic on the network using a SIM, right? Collecting logs from every system. This could have potentially detected abnormal behavior of the attacker moving laterally through the network, even potentially stopping it without any IT staff interaction. And one thing to note here, some of these stages will be purposely done off hours when IT is not working. This will give attackers, potentially more time to do harm, as they understand that if IT staff is home, they're, most likely not actively monitoring the system. So this is where having proper alerting, and escalation chains, 24/7 monitoring can play a major part in stopping an attack such as this. So now let's move on to the data exfiltration phase, where an incident response plan could have stopped the exfiltration of data. This plan could have required all affected systems be disconnected from the network as soon as the attack was detected. Again, having this type of policy and procedure to follow when something like this occurs can be detrimental to minimizing the effects. And finally, the data encryption phase, if all the systems were backed up and those backups were properly protected, the affected workstations and servers could have been restored with minimal data loss. So now I'm going to step into the parts distributor case study and how our early involvement utilizing our framework assisted with stopping this attack from fully progressing. So as I mentioned before, this company had a vulnerable Microsoft Exchange server that was exploited by the attacker. They set up a foothold on the server. This will typically be the first thing they do to ensure they can reconnect if needed. And then they attempted to set up a cryptocurrency mining operation. Note that I used the word attempted. We'll come back to that. Next, they again attempted to move laterally through the network onto other machines, trying to maximize their profits. They then installed Dridex, which is a sophisticated banking Trojan, onto one of the machines that they gained access to. And what was their next steps? Likely ransomware. Fortunately, we're not sure because this attack ended before it could fully progress. So what I'd like to do is review how the framework helped mitigate this attack. So from the identify function, infrastructure track, vulnerability management, right, would have assisted ensuring that the system vulnerabilities are known. This specific vulnerability was a 0-day, meaning it's brand new. It was, many times unknown or recently known to the software vendor. In this example, the company did not have a vulnerability management system in place. The system was left unpatched. We started our involvement in this incident by patching the Exchange server to block any future attempts to exploit. To help detect incidents on the infrastructure and endpoints, we deployed our managed breach detection service, which alerted us to these remote web shells active on their Exchange server. We were able to quickly identify and remove this foothold, and in turn, cut off the attacker's access to the system. To better protect the infrastructure and endpoints, we recommended they install a managed antivirus solution. In this case, Sophos. Sophos was able to detect the cryptocurrency mining files in place and remove them. And this allowed us to quickly remediate this phase of the attack. In the lateral movement phase, again, managed breach detection, agents alerted us that there was lateral movement within the network. This early indication of this within this phase is crucial to minimizing the impacts. And last but certainly not least, utilizing our incident response plan from the respond function, we properly assessed the situation and we requested that all the machines be disconnected from the network. We then assisted with scanning and verifying all machines were clean before allowing them back onto the network. So as you can see, this attack chain was stopped mid-execution and damage was minimized. So I hope these two case studies illustrate how an effective security framework, which is in place, can use multiple layers to all work together for the same purpose, to minimize risk. And with that, so we covered a multitude of processes, procedures, within the framework, each with the intent on increasing security and reducing risk. So what you're looking at here is what we call our impact versus investment chart. The goal here is to illustrate what impact a given item will have on your security posture and at what cost. So on the vertical axis, far left, you could see items higher on the chart have more impact on security than items lower. And on the horizontal axis, you could see items to the left will typically cost more than items on the right. We've designed this to read similar to a Gartner Magic Quadrant graph, where items within the top right quadrant are typically going to be your lowest cost, highest impact, best bang for your buck type of items. Now, just a note here, the actual numbers for both items, right, for both the security impact and the investment cost are obviously going to be different for each company. So we'll typically work with our clients to develop their security roadmap, generate this data, and this in turn helps with planning and decision making on what items to complete first. So what's next? Complete a cybersecurity assessment. Remember, we always start within the identify function within the framework, and cybersecurity assessment is the perfect place to start. Establish your objectives. Good cybersecurity is good risk management. Knowing the likelihood of a threat and the impact that it may have is key to planning your remediation goals. And then you can proceed to build your cybersecurity roadmap. Defining a roadmap can help align security processes with business goals. And it's very important to know where you stand today and to know where you need to be.